I was having coffee with an old colleague, Laura Patterson, right here in beautiful Austin. Laura advises businesses on all aspects of their marketing. Here at Conversion Sciences, we focus on only one piece of the puzzle, that digital channel. So I have a lot of respect for her ability to bring together all of the pieces that make up a modern marketing effort. Advertising, brick and mortar retail, online retail, branding, merchandising, messaging. When I talk to her, I get a new appreciation of just how much CMOs have on their plates. If anybody's going to know what's going on with CMOs, it's Laura. And then she said something about CMOs that stopped me in my tracks. Welcome to Intended Consequences, a podcast from Conversion Sciences. I'm Brian Massey, and I believe that anyone is capable of using behavioral science to get the results their business needs. It delivers intended consequences, and I'll teach you how to harness it.
Why are we seeing the emergence of some of these really interesting titles, like Chief Customer Officer, like Chief Growth Officer? Because we are seeing those titles beginning to emerge, and it concerns me that many times when you read the job descriptions, these are job descriptions that reflected the kinds of things that marketing leaders used to perform.
Just when I was marveling at how much CMOs really must do for their brands, my friend Laura Patterson said something that blew me away. Laura is the founder of VisionEdge Marketing. Like me, Laura's been focused on performance marketing and the proper use of data since before it was cool. So I was left speechless when she said, CMOs are abdicating their strategic position in their businesses. Now, Laura is not the kind of person to jump to conclusions, so I had to take notice. A few weeks later, I was on a panel with friend and fellow marketer Janet Driscoll Miller. She reminded the audience and me of a Fornaise Marketing Group study of 1,200 CEOs, and it found that 80% of them did not trust and were not impressed by the work done by marketers. By comparison, the same group, 90% of them trusted their CIOs and CFOs. There's a link to these in the show notes. I did some additional research and found more incriminating news. Forrester recently reported that dozens of major brands had eliminated the CMO position altogether. Brands like Johnson & Johnson, Kellogg's, Taco Bell, and Netflix. I wanted to get to the bottom of this. Was I part of the problem, focusing on just one channel? I invited Laura to join me here in the offices of Conversion Sciences and tell us what she knows. So why does Laura believe CMOs are losing their seat at the table in the C-suite? Let's listen. I'm always interested in what brings people to the place they are. Marketing is a mix of creative right brain and more structured left brain work. And so I'm always curious about what brings people to this place. You can go back as far as you want, high school, college.
Okay.
Tell us what brought you to this place as the founder of VisionEdge Marketing.
So I like to think of myself as a whole brain person, but if I'm really honest, my roots in marketing are on the left brain, more on the science side of marketing. So I'll tell a story about my first true marketing job. Not my first job. I've had several jobs, but my first true marketing job was in financial services. I started my career working for someone who was a finance guy. I think it's important to know that in my career, I've really only worked with two kinds of people, engineers or finance people or accountants. Mm-hmm. So that's probably colored my view and made me a stronger on the science side. Maybe didn't force me to flex my creative side as much. But when I went to work for Dwight, my title, this is way back in the 70s, so was Customer Relationship Manager. Interesting title, given what we have today in CRM systems. And what he hired me for was to be responsible for keeping and growing the value of existing customers. So my job really wasn't about acquisition as much as it was about retention and share of wallet. And one of my very first assignments that sort of helped me realize that I actually do like the science side of marketing is he walked me into the office and back in those days, Brian, you can probably remember, we didn't have all these fancy computers on our on our desks with all kinds of information. I had a computer, but it went to a mainframe that didn't do anything. But everything about every customer was in a manila folder. And there were just rows and rows of manila folders. And
like the doctor's office.
Like a doctor's office. And his comment to me was, we don't really have any way that we look at our customer set. We probably ought to have a segmentation model of some kind so that we can figure out what might be the best offers in order to do retention and expansion.
Okay.
He said, so come up with one. And he turned me loose. And, I went through the first, couple dozen of folders, and I started trying to, on a legal size piece of paper, figure out how we might create a segmentation model. And then I got, to the next batch and realized I needed to add some more data fields into the model, so forth and so on, and eventually created a segmentation model. And I actually thought that was really cool.
A segmentation model from manila folders.
A segmentation model from manila folders.
The
and
rest
you know
of us
what?
have no excuse not to be doing this work.
I will admit, it took longer than I thought it would. But when we finally did do that, there were some very cool things we looked at. For example, were they baseball fans or football fans? Did they like the theater, or did they, like camping? Kinds of interesting beginning of persona work or lifestyle work in financial services. That was cool, right?
And were there indications early on that you were going to be more of this analytical thing, or that you would fall in love with the analytical side of things earlier in life? I'm just curious.
I think because I love to ask the question why. I think I probably drove my father crazy with why. So why is that? Why do we have that many colors in a rainbow? I would ask my father, or, things like that. I love to understand the why. And why, I think, is where you start with almost anything is, well, why? Why do they do that? Or why didn't they do that? Very recently, who is looking at some data, and they offer a trial. And this is not uncommon. As many of us know companies that offer trials, whether that's a trial like Hootsuite or a trial with a SEO program or whatever they're out there, all kinds of trials.
Yep.
And what they're seeing is a lower conversion rate from trial to purchase. And really trying to understand why. That's the real question. Well, why is that? Their first inclination was, we need to change the price. But maybe that's not the answer. I think we need to know the why. So in answer to your question, I think what drove me to the analytical side is really trying to understand the why.
Yeah, and I think that we can tend to bang it out of you can only hear why so many times on a trip before you're like, please just be quiet. And now we're at a position where companies like me come in, and suddenly we're like, all right, everybody should be asking why. And people scratching their heads going, it's just a good design. Can't we just go with that? And no. Now we have so much data and so many ways of answering the question why, following our curiosity, that I guess we're having to take everybody back to their childhood and get past that stern, stop asking questions.
Well, I was really fortunate. I did never hear that from my father. But what I do think happens and can happen if we're not careful is we can ask why, to your point, so long and so frequently that we never use the answer to do anything. We end up in sort of analysis paralysis. And that can happen to those of us on the highly analytic side. So that's finding that balance, right, every day of asking the question why, getting that information, translating that into something that's relevant and meaningful, and then taking action. So it's that whole process that I actually find rewarding, and then putting that into action as an experiment, seeing how it goes. And I imagine in your business, you do a lot of experiments.
We love our experiments.
Right. We do too. We love doing experiments and then seeing if it works or not. I mean, that's the whole point of doing anything. Even research is a form of the scientific method, right? Exactly. Yeah. Here we are. All the things we did learn back then about the scientific method, and here we are applying them in our everyday work.
And we preach on that. This, you don't have to do an A/B test to do an experiment. There's so many other ways. You can pull some analytics data. You can pull some manila folders together. Those all qualify as experiments because you're going in and saying, what am I going to find? But this really does start to point at one of the reasons I invited you on this. We were having coffee and you said something very tantalizing. And it was, so you deal with strategic marketing issues. You're in using the data to start answering the questions why and start coming up with strategies that move a business forward from a marketing standpoint. And you had said, CMOs are abdicating their strategic role, and they're all in on, in all honesty, what we focus on: digital campaigns, delivering leads, and delivering sales. And that really struck me. What is it that leads you to believe that CMOs are abdicating that strategic part of it, that higher level?
Earlier this year, Spencer Stewart did a piece of research around the CMO shuffle and why they think that is. And
Spencer Stewart, the recruiting firm.
Yes, and they do annual CMO surveys. And in their study, they talked a little bit about one of the reasons being that CMOs need to be more focused on understanding the business and aligning themselves around the business, right? So being much more of a business partner, strategic partner. And that got echoed in a recent piece that was done by Newistar, a marketing company. I think they're in the UK. And they did a piece of research talking about maybe you're not measuring the right things. It really has something to do maybe with getting a better alignment with the business. So there's a kind of a trend. If you're looking at data, something around alignment around the business. And then if you look at the study that was done by Gartner quite recently for their annual CMO study, which I think is the 2019-2020 study, they said the priorities of CMOs going forward, the top 3 priorities are market, customer, competitive intelligence, sounds like data, marketing analytics, translating that into something that you can make actionable, and then operational excellence. So instead of the budget going to let's buy more tools, it was let's get our skills more refined around this data so we can make better, hopefully, strategic decisions. And then if you look at, I think, I can't remember which one is which, Accenture has their new study out and PwC has their new study out. One is the 22nd annual CEO study. I think that's PwC, looking at what CEOs are thinking about in the coming year and what do they see as the challenges. And one of their biggest gaps is around customer data. An interesting correlation. And so if you look at what's going on, it looks like maybe, and their expectation is that marketing should be doing a better job in this area. So we are being told as marketers we need to be better at data, but maybe we've taken our data too far down into the view, right? The view is, the aperture is around the funnel as opposed to a bigger view, which is what market should we be in, or how do we grow in the market that we're in? What products should we be, our services should we be bringing to market that will allow us to be more competitive and find, keep, and grow our customers? Questions that are bigger that data should be answering, right? Kind of back to Dwight's question, I need a segmentation model, but why? It was because I want to retain these customers and I want to grow the services I'm doing with these customers. So then the question became, okay, which services go with which set of customers? That was the whole point.
Right. So you touched on a couple things. In your experience, where does product live in relation to the CMO? Because what I'm hearing you say is that when we come up above the funnel and perhaps the branding approach, which is almost always a CMO job, you're talking about which markets should we be in, which starts to point to what sorts of features should we have in our products to address those markets. Is product usually under the CMO, or is that under someone else? How does that work?
Well, I love one of Seth Godin's quotes, and I'm probably going to butcher it now that I'm being recorded, but it goes something like this: find products for your customers, not customers for your products. And so it starts with customers. Well, marketing is the only function right now that has the word market in it, right? We have customer success evolving. We have customer service, which has been around a long time. But in terms of really understanding the market and being able to tap into the market and know where the market is going and keeping a pulse on the market and on the competition in some kind of orchestrated fashion, that's marketing, right? That's why Peter Drucker, quote, there's only 2 things that matter when it comes to creating a customer: marketing and innovation. Innovation being the product side, marketing being how do you motivate and get the right message to the right people. Right. Those kinds of questions.
What you're saying is that data is not being fed back so that the product people can design better products or better bundles or whatever the
marketing
issue
should
is.
Be bringing that back, right? So if it's product marketing as opposed to product management and you're the CMO, ideally product marketing would be one of the functions in addition to brand marketing or marketing communications or field marketing or however you've organized your team, right? That you would have is underneath your function. Which brings the question, why are we seeing the emergence of some of these really interesting titles like Chief Customer Officer, like Chief Growth Officer? Because we are seeing those titles beginning to emerge. And it concerns me that many times when you read the job descriptions, these are job descriptions that reflected the kinds of things that marketing leaders used to perform.
Chief Growth Officer, Chief Revenue Officer, Chief Customer Officer. Sounds a little bit redundant because those, at one point, were the job of the CMO. I also find this interesting because we've really just left a 10-ish year period in which all of the big companies have put business intelligence, data warehouses in place. Our experience is that the teams, the web and digital teams that we work with actually don't have access to those business intelligence tools, or it's siloed away. So it's very difficult for us to get real-time feedback into what we're doing. Has that, taking that data to a CIO, who's typically responsible for putting those things together, has that taken some of this customer-oriented responsibility away from the CMO in your experience?
That's an interesting question, Brian. So I'm going to go back and think about my career for a moment, and then I'm going to answer the question. I'm going to kind of give context. So early in my career, when I first came to Austin, I came to Austin to work for Motorola. That's what brought me here. I was working in a software company that had a new product application that ran on a Wang 2200, just to give context, okay, to people out there so they can understand that era. The reason I was hired by Motorola was they had a startup. They wanted someone with startup technology experience that did marketing and had marketing and sales background. And so there weren't a lot of, when you're thinking about the late 70s, early 80s, there really weren't a lot of us, right, that were willing to move to Austin. Of course, everyone will raise their hand to come to Austin today, but you got to remember in 1982, what Austin was like was a very different town.
It was a music, hippie, hangout sort of a
barbecue
place.
Barbecue
joint, yeah.
Dance hall.
With these weird technology people kind of parachuting in.
We had IBM here, which now is the domain.
IBM, TI, Motorola.
3M's big campus wasn't here yet. Motorola's Oak Hill and Palmer campuses did not exist.
It was the Armadillo World headquarters.
That's
and
right.
6th Street. And,
fun times, right?
Mm-hmm.
But where I was going with that is, on my desk was this box that blinked green at me, right? I mean, it was a mainframe. It was access to a computer, but I had nothing on like the power of the machines that we have available today.
And the younger folks in our audience might be very amused that there was a computer, a great computer named the Wang, or by Wang Corporation.
Well, and the computer on my desk was actually an IBM mainframe desk.
Oh, it was?
Maybe a Cray at Motorola. So the Wang was a different company. That was a startup company that I was working for. But when I came to Austin and went to work for Motorola, there was this blinking machine that blinked green, and you'd had to put a query in. You had to know how to frame your query. Mm-hmm. And then the data that you were asking for would come back in this green bar report from the MIS organization, sometime in the next day to 2 to 3 days. And if you asked the question wrong, then what you got was what you got. Mm-hmm. What you got, might have to start over. So the people who are belly aching about data, I have really very little empathy because there's more and more data today than ever. And I had to go ask for my data, right? I wasn't at my fingertips sitting on a machine. And what I learned is who has the data, because I needed to have data to make decisions about things that we were going to, again, how should we segment? What kind of offers are best? How do we understand the buying journey and the decision-making process? The same questions people are asking today, we were asking. Today we have account-based marketing. Back then we had strategic account marketing, right? Everything old is new again. Back then we had pipeline engineering. Today we have customer journey mapping, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can remember those kinds of phrases, but that's kind of what the world was like. But we were doing many of the same things, right? And we needed data to do them just then like we do today.
Well, what was it? I'm curious let me interrupt, because what was it that kept you from being afraid to go into the room with the green blinking machine and ask it for data, or ask the MIS department for data? Was there something that gave you confidence in that, or is this something that we're all kind of wired with?
I guess I never thought I wasn't supposed to do that.
Nobody told you not to.
Nobody told me not to. And I have to admit, we were 40-person organization inside at that time, Motorola only had 2,500 people here in Austin. Most of those were in a fab, right? We were pretty early. And as we got much bigger, by the time I left Motorola, we were 12,500 people. So 5 times growth. So the company, when I first started, was much smaller. By the time I left, it was a $27 billion company with 100,000 people globally. So big changes. And of course, processes did change along the way, and so did the machines on our desk. Mm-hmm. But we were encouraged. We was an engineering company. There was no problem with people wanting data. You know, that old saying, in God we trust, all others bring data, is certainly true. When we worked in an engineering company, you had to bring data to the conversation. Nobody was just going to take your word for it. So it wasn't like asking for data was, get you sanctioned.
And so this may be one of the challenges for CMOs. Like, engineering companies come with a culture of experiment, use data, park your biases as best you can. The marketing department for an apparel company doesn't come from a tradition of engineering. And so these skills have to be learned, or this culture has to be changed. And maybe this is one of those areas where the CMOs find themselves at a disadvantage. So you work with a lot of CMOs, and I'm curious, do they see the writing on the wall? Are they saying the same things like, I don't have the seat at the table in the C-suite that I used to have?
So with full disclosure, the majority of our customers are B2B. And people often ask me, what is the difference between B2B and B2C, right? They think they know. So when I'm teaching like at a class, in a college, and we're teaching marketing, and we get into a conversation about B2B and B2C, and I like to use a little different explanation than what be traditional.
Hit us with it.
Okay, so companies that have a long sales cycle, that's a consultative sell, that have a variety of people in the decision-making process, that's a B2B kind of process. Walking through the checkout lane and trying to make a decision about whether I should get a candy bar, and whether if I am going to get a candy bar, it's a Snickers or a Butterfinger, that's a B2C sell. Buyer's remorse on the candy bar might be there the next day and I have to do an extra run, but I'm not going to get fired for that, right? Probably not. I might get a little bit of pushback at home, like, why didn't you bring me one too? But other than that, not a big deal. But we do have B2B buying processes that occur in the consumer world, like buying a house. That probably is a multi-person decision.
Long sales cycle.
Probably has some long sales. Very few people will just walk down the neighborhood and say, I want that house, although I know that happens, right? But even then, if it's not for sale, that might create a different problem than if it is for sale, right? And probably is a consultative sell. You could probably have a variety of people that are part of the consultative sell is like, what does the inspection say? All kinds of gates that have to be passed.
Mm-hmm. Mom and dad giving their opinion.
If you're young or whatever. And then other things like major medical procedures. Like if you have a major medical procedure or a major medical illness, odds are you're in a B2B process. You're not in, it's not the same as like, I need to give you a filling for your tooth. But on the other hand, hey, you got a serious problem. I'm looking at you and it looks like you've got throat cancer. Here's what we need to do.
So you think the monikers are the problem? When I say B2B, I assume I'm selling to a business, and therefore buying a house, since I'm not making a decision from a business, doesn't qualify. You prefer a highly considered purchase versus a not highly considered purchase.
Yeah, so think about the wedding dress. Right? Probably a little bit more like the B2B journey than it is like the B2C journey. Not that as someone who's saying, I'm getting married tomorrow, I got to have a dress. Not that that couldn't happen. But in the normal buying journey, buying the wedding dress usually takes a while, is a consultative sell, and there's several people involved in the buying decision, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting that it's as complicated as making a decision about what platform you're going to run your company's, enterprise system on. But you can see that it's not the same as walking into an apparel store and buying a pair of socks.
And online, I'm going to take a different approach with a wedding dress site versus a Gap Kids or something like that, where purchase is not as considered, long sales cycle, then there aren't as many people involved.
On the other hand, B2C has a tremendous amount of data. So we're taking it back to data. When you checkout of the grocery store, the amount of data they're collecting on what was in your basket, and how many of each item, and
thousands of data points.
Oh, huge amount of data that they're collecting. And if you have a rewards card, they know who you are and how frequently you shopped, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Lots of information compared to what you might have in a B2B world. So in some ways, the B2C folks have more data and have more access to that data than the B2B folks. So I know we got off the track, but that has implications, because that's why in the world of B2C, you have these brand managers and product line managers that are running their marketing, as opposed to in the B2B world, where it's really the CMO really should be much more engaged in that process, in my opinion.
So other than changing their title, what sorts of strategies can CMOs engage to get back into that more strategic framework? What do they need to change?
I would say that the number one thing that any CMO can do right now that would signal that they are taking a more strategic stance and want to be more of a strategic partner is how they frame the marketing plan. And the reason I say that, so I'm giving very practical advice, whether it's us or anyone else that you use for marketing planning. And the reason I say that is many people are being asked right now to give a budget. They don't even have a plan yet, but they're talking about money.
End of year budget planning.
End of year budget planning for a lot of people. Not everybody, but a lot of people. And when they do that, what they're going to do is they're going to open up whatever document they used last year for their planning and their budget. They're going to make some decisions about off the cuff what they're going to do next year in terms of events or campaigns. So maybe they'll look at some data. They're going to put a number on it. They're going to read maybe Gartner's like, what's the allocation of budget going to be? They're going to do some finagling and they're going to submit a budget. That's not a plan.
It's a budget.
It's a budget. But you've come up with a budget before you've actually got a plan. And many of these marketing people may or may not even know yet what the 3 to 5 things are the company has to do next year in order to win. They may have some general idea they want to grow, but we don't market to buckets of revenue, and we can't just say grow. We need to be very clear. Our success depends on making the following bets, and our flag must fly here. Our flag must fly in this market or in this market or in this location, whatever that looks like. For us to win next year, this is what we have to be.
These are the beachheads we have got to conquer in the next 12 months.
Love that metaphor, right? Because my first question to any CMO is, what are the beachheads?
What are the beach? That's a great question.
And if I don't know that and they don't know that, how can we put a plan together?
And that's a great question at any stage. If you're in an early adopter market, those beachheads are really important. Picking where you're going to own those beachheads in the main market. But even a maturing product has got to figure out, all right, where am I going to stick my flag and what hill am I going to die on?
Yes.
If a competitor beats me or if I misread the market.
And if you're a maturing company, is what hills can I not afford to lose?
Yes. Right?
I cannot give this hill up because that would be a problem, right? So in a bigger company, it's not just what's the offense, but it's also what do we have to retain, right? That was back to my early job. I wasn't about getting customers. He didn't have a problem getting customers. He wanted to make sure he kept and grew the ones he had, which was pretty substantial number of companies.
Yes. And, that really is a big theme right now on the digital marketing side. Now, again, I think we're getting back into the weeds, but understanding that the clients you have are the market segment that you need to dominate first is sometimes lost at a strategic level because we are so focused on acquisition in the digital market. Facebook ads that drive to landing pages that get a lead that we can then email to and get them to buy.
Yes. So that's back to that aperture. Down in that level of the funnel, there's nothing wrong with that. It's very actional and also transactional. But on the other hand, I really want, and of course, if you're doing all the things that you're talking about, you're thinking about the who. And as a result, you're thinking about the message. I mean, you're going through that process. But that's a very different level than of thinking through what is the beachheads? What's the overall strategy for that? So is my strategy, for example, I want to go into an adjacent market. What does that look like? What do I have to do? If I go into an adjacent market, how do I do that with existing customers? Or what's a different strategy? Or how do I expand in the market I'm in? Different kinds of questions that a CMO that wants to be a strategic partner is coming to the table and says, I understand these are the 5 things that we need to do next year. Here's how we think we can help. Is that in line with what you were thinking we should be doing?
Yeah. And for those listening that want to be a CMO at some point in their career, what is it that CMOs aren't getting, that they're getting to the CMO position, but they're not saying, all right, now I'm going to use my data to make these very important decisions? What's happening in that journey that we need to watch for?
So that's a great question. So I was in a working session with a pretty large global company quite recently with the marketing organization for a multi-billion-dollar line of business. So we're not talking about a small company. Mm-hmm. And getting the marketing folks to think strategically as opposed to thinking about the things, the stuff, right?
And when you say marketing folks, you mean?
The whole marketing team was in this room.
The whole team.
The entire team. The first thing they gravitate to is, we'll run an email campaign, we'll run some digital ads, we'll do this social media thing, and we'll go to this event or series of events. And we haven't even really talked about, like, what is it that marketing is expected to deliver ultimately? Is it to deliver some number of conversations? Is it to deliver some number of category ownership? Is it some level of growth over the competition?
I don't know about everybody else, but I'm more motivated by a CMO coming in and saying, we're going to own this market. I need you guys to figure that out, as opposed to coming in and saying, we need more leads for sales. We need to double the number of leads that we're getting so that we can grow next year. Those are 2 very different ways of motivating, and sounds like take a very different kind of CMO to
and different kind of data, right? So a colleague of mine who has done a lot of work in the demand gen, has served in the demand gen role through her career a lot, said, I can change the number of leads anytime just by changing the criteria, right?
Yeah.
I can change that. That's not what is expected. If I'm going to do my job right, it's really, how do I increase the win rate, right? So her thinking is, it's not leads, it's win rate, even in the demand gen world. That changes the way you think. How do I change the win rate is a very different question than how do I make more leads?
Well, because you have to be responsible for more than just this little digital fiefdom. That starts to involve sales and product design, product delivery, all of those things, especially if the segment you're interested in is those existing customers.
Yes. And it also depends on how competitive and where you are in your stage of growth, right? When you're a company that's been growing double digit and you've gone from, you grew 25% last year, and then this year you grew another 25%, and then, whatever. Maybe 25% is not realistic because now you've gotten enough of the share, there maybe isn't as much left. So really looking at the data again and what is realistic. Maybe you've gotten all the easy opportunities and the win rate's been really high. What's left may be much harder. Or maybe we decide, you know what, we're going to stop going after that because we've gotten the category ownership that we want. We're going to shift over here because we want to get traction in this market and leave the really hard ones either for later or whatever. See, that's a strategic decision.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing, and I love this. So if you're listening to this podcast, we talk almost exclusively about applying data to these particular marketing problems that are curious for me and affect our clients. If I'm going to prep myself to fill this vacuum, the CMO vacuum, the experiments I'm doing day to day on my campaigns is going to equip me with the ability to then take these statistical knowledge, the things I know how to do with data, to a more strategic level. And that's going to better qualify me, as long as they haven't gone out and hired a chief growth officer or something like that. Our team looks like a growth team. Oftentimes we'll be working besides a growth team, but it's configured very much the same, and we're using the same tools to do those experiments. So I can see how a CMO might be getting crowded in by something that people see as different, but the CMO shouldn't see as different, if I was to summarize that. Are there signs before they hire that CGO next to me? Are there signs as a CMO that I should be on the lookout for, or as an employee of a CMO that is losing that strategic capability or that strategic voice in the C-suite? What are some of the symptoms that I should look for?
I love the fact that you're asking what are some signs that you're doing it right, or signs that you're maybe in trouble, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So signs that you're in trouble, they start just relegating you to running programs.
Okay.
Right. I need another program. 1-800 marketing I need you to make a new campaign. 1-800-Marketing, we have this event. I need you to go spin up. 1-800-Marketing, can you get me, some more literature content around X? Right? Whatever that is, 1-800-Marketing.
You were telling me the story about a CMO that just got a new CEO.
Yes. 1-800-Marketing all of a sudden she was facing and concerned that this new CEO saw marketing as the brochure maker, right? Essentially in her mind. And she had been in a pretty strategic role. And so scrambling to be able to articulate the value proposition for marketing being in a more strategic role as opposed to marketing being in this tactical sales support role. Right. And she was able to do that, fortunately, because I think she'd have been very unhappy if she had been moved into that other role. Random acts of marketing. If you're doing random acts of marketing, you're probably going to see some red flags around that, right?
Random acts of marketing. I love that.
Yes. And we have a case study on our website by Mott. A great company, B2B company, not the applesauce company, the company that's in the metal filtration space, very B2B, love what they do. And, they had been doing random acts of marketing and wanted to change the way that they did marketing and to be more strategic. And so we have a case study about that. And I think that their journey is very similar to what other companies can do to make their marketing more strategic. So those are red flags. When you start getting pushback about your data and you start getting pushback about what you're measuring, like you come in and you say, we did X number of campaigns last year and we got an ROI of Y, and you start getting pushback. Or we did X this coming year, we did X number of events and we brought back X number of new leads. And you start getting pushback to that.
Why would you get pushback on that?
Because most of the time the C-suite is going to start asking, that's interesting. What did you do to move the needle for my business?
I see.
Right. So the real question becomes, what are you doing to move the needle for my business? Because remember what the CEOs are trying to do, back to that 22nd annual CEO study, is grow. How do I grow? How do I grow organically? Where do I go to grow? What do I need to bring to the market to grow? And so if you're telling me I produce X number of new leads from these trade shows, that's not answering the question of how does that tie back to my beachhead. So if you can't connect those dots, they're going to go find someone who can connect those dots.
Got it. And, vanity metrics are one of the first things that we kill, people who are optimizing for clicks.
Yes.
There are people who are optimizing open rates in emails, which are just not good metrics. They're not predictive of the bottom line. But
we call those output metrics.
Output metrics.
Because
I'm going to steal that.
You can. It's public. You can find it on our website. So people do activity, like they run some campaigns and they send out emails, or they do social media activity. They attend events and they track that. And that's activity, effort, right? And then they talk about what that produced. We got this many clicks, this much open rate, this many people came to the booth, this many people register, attended a webinar, whatever those look like. Those are outputs. The next question becomes, how do I connect those outputs to an outcome? And how are those outcomes related to what the business is trying to achieve? And if you can answer those questions, you're going in the right direction. So
one answers the question, did you do any work? The other question answers, did you impact the business?
Yes.
And that's quite a difference.
Yes.
When you get back to the office, I've always seen data as a tool of empowerment, a way to level the playing field, and a way to truly understand those crazy people we call customers. Now, who's in a better position to access this data than the CMO? But apparently, data doesn't change culture on its own. It needs a fertile soil of experimentation to take root. Otherwise, it's just numbers that can be used when they're going up and to the right, and discounted if they tell the wrong story. A culture of experimentation can be pushed from the top, from the CMO down. It can also be nurtured from the bottom, from you. It's time for marketers to put the data we have to use. For you, it all starts with your next experiment or research project. It starts the next time you log into analytics and click beyond the dashboard report, deep into the souls of your prospects and customers. Because if not marketing, then who will do this? So go science something.